Before we get started with Excel, I wanted to go over the assignment packet so that you understood some of the things that I'm going to be talking to you about. This information here is going to be helpful in helping you get started. Before we begin, you're going to have to choose whether or not you're going to have a quantitative example or a qualitative example for your data use assignment. A quantitative example is just whether something is right or wrong, where a qualitative is more of a judgment call. For instance, in PE, if a PE instructor was teaching students how to dribble and assessing their dribbling ability, oftentimes that's not a right or wrong, and so they're going to judge it based on a scale of 1 being poor and 5 being a very good dribbler. As you go through this assignment, you'll want to pay special attention to some of the requirements that are given, and when you begin writing your assignment, this is a good outline to follow for that writing assignment. Let's first begin by looking at the different examples. So for instance, this is the pre-test of a qualitative assignment, so whatever you chose. This is how well your students did in the pre-test, and this is how well they did in the post-test. This information has already been generated for you, and that is going to be different to the quantitative information, where you'll see that students either had a right or wrong. It's not graded on a scale at all. And so make sure that you understand the difference between the two different assessments and which one you're going to use for this assignment. Once you have decided that, we're going to move into Excel, and here is your data use worksheet. This has been set up for you and is available for you in Joule. And if we're doing a quantitative assessment, then we're going to look, these are the students and these are how they did on the question. So for instance, if student 1 got question 1 right, then they get 1 point. But if they got question 2 wrong, they would get no points. And so we're going to continue going down this path, and I would be looking at the guide sheet and seeing how well they did. And so we can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that student 1 got 5 correct. Now, we could easily do that and just add the totals ourselves, but then we're not using the software properly, especially when you start getting into larger amounts. And so if I highlight just those numbers and come up here to auto sum and I just click on sum, it already knows that it's going to give that sum right there. And so that's a nice feature. Let's say that all the students in my classroom got the question 1 correct. After we go and we enter all the data into our spreadsheet, it's going to give us some very telling information about our students. So for question 1, we obviously know that the pretest average is going to be 1. But let's say that this student here got a 0 and this student here got a 0. We still know that our students did fairly well, but let's check out the average. To do the average, we're going to go to the same box, but we're going to click on average, and just below it will give that average. And this is for a quantitative example. You're going to want to do data entry, all this information all the way across for the entire pretest, and then again for the entire post-test. In the end, you're going to have something that looks like this. Now this looks exactly the same as the one we just saw, but this is for a qualitative example. So instead of doing 1s and 0s, this example is showing 1s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, the variation of how students did. And this next part is the most important part, is the creating the illustrations that you will be placing inside your assignment. The first graph that you're going to be creating is a pretest total, and this is just showing how the students did before you taught them anything. They're not supposed to know this information or do very well, but it's always good to know where your students stand prior to the assignment. And so I'm going to highlight, including the words here and these and all of their totals. I'm going to come up to Insert, Column. I'm going to choose a 2D column. And here is a nice printout of students 1 through 12 and how they did. Now, the y-axis here is a little bit skewed because Excel doesn't know that it's actually out of 50 points. So I'm going to fix this and make it a When looking and analyzing this graph, you'll notice that the students did not do very well on the pretest, which is to be expected. So you will copy and paste this into your Word document. The next graph that you're going to need is you're going to look at the pretest averages. What this is looking at how your students did on each individual question as a whole. And so as I look at this, I know that my y-axis value is skewed a little bit, so I want to fix that to be so that it's 5.0 since it is the qualitative test. And as we look here, we notice that question 4 was really difficult for all of my students, and so you want to make sure that you make a note of things like that maybe a question was really easy for the students or really hard, and that'll help you when you start preparing your lesson so that you know which objectives you really need to hit on in your class. The next graph that you're going to make is a comparison of the pre-test totals to the post-test totals. To do this, I'll highlight the pre-test totals and I'll press Control on my keyboard. I'll select the students, and then while still pressing Control on my keyboard, I will select the post-test total of the students. I'll go up to Insert, Column, and it'll create a graph. The green is the post-test and the blue is the pre-test, and I'll get rid of this this value here by just pressing Delete. And another thing that this graph is going to need a title, and so I'm going to just shrink this down a little bit. I'm going to go up to Layout, choose Chart Title, and I can label this whatever I want. So pre-test versus post-test. And now another thing that all of your graphs are going to need to have is you're going to need to label the x-axis and label the y-axis, and that can be done here at the top while you're in Layout. If you go to Axis Titles, the horizontal axis, we'll put one there, and again you might have to adjust some things so that your graphs are looking professional, and then you also need a vertical axis here, and so it may take some doing to move these things around, but for instance mine doesn't want to move very much. There we go, so that it's all looking nice. That is the third graph you need. The fourth graph that you're going to need is a comparison of the questions. So how did you do as a teacher in preparing your students? I highlighted the pre-test averages, I press Control, I highlight the post-test averages, go to Insert, Column, and we see question 4 here that our students did a lot better, but it still was the toughest question in the book. Some things you're going to want to add to this graph are going to be the chart title and the y and x-axis titles. After this, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to place all of these graphs in a Word document and answer the questions in the assignment sheet. When everything's all said and done, you're going to be turning in a Word document that shows all 4 graphs and that completely analyzes each of the graphs. And that Word document is going to begin with an introduction. And the first graph that you're going to show is the pre-test student graph. And you're going to analyzing the graph, explaining what the students know individually and as a class. You'll move into the second graph, which explains the concepts or questions, which ones are difficult or easy. And so you need to show your ability to analyze that graph and to identify what area the teacher should focus on during that lesson. Finally, when you compare, after both tests have been given, you're going to analyze and see how the students did overall, how the individual students did, and how the class did, and whether they showed improvement or not. Finally, a comparison of the averages will be data showing on how well you did in reaching those objectives in your class. Finally, that Word document is going to need to end with a conclusion in how this data is useful in helping teaching your students and helping you in preparing you for your classroom. So if there's any questions on this assignment, you can go and look back at the assignment sheet and it'll have the answers for you.